Hey, welkom alla till det Benny Rene show, wow. Benny, vad är det för del?
Beter als vanligt.
Beter als vanligt?
Ja.
Beter als vi ens verdient han?
Beter als we ons verdiend hebben.
Hey, weet je wat? Vi han för del wat zoja intressant.
Klaus?
Oh ja.
Ja, what's
Ja.
that?
Nou, vi merken hier för del en podcast med en zoja intressanta man.
Amen. Yes, sir.
Ja,
John Kempf, nee?
ja, was. John Kempf, den har vi hier för del på ons podcast. Så vi var om för del en engelsk entrevistar. Nu här var vi en podcast nog en plottage translaten. Jag glömde Benny, vad tyckte du?
Dat is de hoopning.
Dat is de hoopning, dat hij dat wordt doen. Maar så deze ganze entrevista, det var in Engels sen. En vi kijken på så förwurzel till vad vi hier waren leren, vad vi för ons omgivning kan doen. En jag vet att vad vielleicht viel ut utkom, aber för morgon, den 17 februari var bisschen, blev ik så jag finner dag sen här med John Kempf upp. So, John, welcome to the Benny and Rene show, sir.
Thanks for having me on.
It's a real pleasure. It's a real honor. We didn't really think this would be possible when we first heard your podcast with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., if I'm not mistaken.
Now you've figured out that most anything is possible.
And then we were like, well, now it's definitely not going to be possible. And we were so inspired, and we sent that podcast to many people, to our friends and so on, and they were inspired, and we were all like, well, we need to figure out if we can get Mr. Kempf down here and see if we can learn a few things.
Yes, sir.
What inspired you?
We've heard many podcasts about people talking about soil health, regenerative farming, how to get away from fertilizers, how to remain profitable, so on and so on. But there were two things, for me anyways, and I'll let Benny speak for himself. But first of all, that the Secretary of Health for the United States of America was interviewing you, that gave you some credibility that we had not seen with any of these other guys before.
Yeah.
And again, never heard of you before, heard that Bobby Kennedy was interviewing you, and your answers on that show were not answers that were someone that was trying to prove a point in the sense of, grandeur. You were humble, confident, you knew what you were talking about. Even from my very limited understanding of farming, I could understand that you were talking about knowledge that was applicable. And knowledge that we really don't have here in the bigger scale of things. We might have bits and pieces of it, but we don't have the complete puzzle. And when I heard all of that, I was like, this could be an answer to prayer. This could be something we've been looking for.
Yeah. Very much so, and it definitely didn't sound like you just pulled it out of thin air. It came with a lot of experience, which gave it a lot more credibility, a lot more believable, which in many cases is not the case. It's just theory.
I think it certainly has been it's been an interesting journey to be on. It's been a journey with, oh my goodness, we're learning so much more new information, additional information every year. But the reality is a lot of the voice of experience that I'm able to speak from, much of it is my own. I have 20 years of experience, but I've also had the benefit of learning from many amazing people. I've had so many great mentors who've been in this space. The piece that I found to be so intriguing when I first started learning about plant health and how to grow crops that were resistant to diseases and insects, I started discovering all these people who had been doing this research on plant immune systems and disease resistance and insect resistance. Like, the information was out there. It was in the research community. There were people who had been working on this for many of them for 30, 40 years of their life. But their research work just didn't fit the official narrative. It didn't fit the economic incentives of the day. And so the information that they had been learning was just sitting there collecting dust. And so the reality is there is so much incredible knowledge and information that is out there, and much of what I've done and helped other people to do is just simply bring that together into one place and help it make coherent sense. And then it works.
So in short, could you explain what is it that you do?
Well, I'm not sure how to phrase this exactly. I don't want to say I've figured out. Maybe the right way to say it is that I've learned. I've learned that there is a completely different approach to plant nutrition, which also inherently provides health.
Mm.
And the mainstream agronomic approach for the last 80 or 90 years has been based on this model that plants absorb soluble ions as nutrients. They absorb nitrate ions and phosphorus ions and potassium ions and so forth. And it's true that plants have that capacity. After all, that's how hydroponics works. But this different model, I learned that plants can also get their nutrition from microbes, 100% of their nutrition from microbes. And that form of nutrition is not water soluble, and it doesn't show up in the same types of lab tests.
Oh.
And it hasn't really entered into the mainstream in a significant way for the simple reason that historically what we could measure well was chemistry. We could measure soil chemistry, and therefore we could manage it. Well, now, just in the last decade, really just in the last 5 years, we're able to manage soil biology much better and able to manage that. And there's a bunch of fun science behind all of this, but the short version is that plants can also get all of their nutrition from biology instead of from simple ions. But when they do that, they're no longer dependent on water-soluble nutrients. That means, what happens if you have in mainstream agriculture, if you're dependent on water-soluble nutrients, what happens when the water disappears?
Exactly. So that was my thought.
Your plant nutrients disappear. They're no longer available.
Mm-hmm.
And with biological nutrition, to a limit, of course, there's also still a practical limit, but biological nutrition can continue to deliver nutrients and, interestingly enough, can continue to deliver water when the soil is still much drier and has much less water in it than when you have these water-soluble ions. And there's lots of explanation for that. But the interesting piece was in learning about this biological form of nutrition, discovering that this form of nutrition also provides disease resistance and provides insect resistance. And we know that all of us, each of us sitting here around the room, have our own immune systems. But our immune systems don't all work equally well. Some people become ill very readily, and other people practically never become ill. And the difference between those two individuals is how well their immune system has been supported with nutrition and with their microbiome over the course of their entire lifetime. In fact, even from before they were born. And I discovered, to my surprise, this was very early on when I was researching and trying to understand some of the things that were happening on our farm, I learned, to my surprise, that plants also have an immune system that arguably can be said to be even more robust and even stronger than our immune systems, because plants can't run away.
That's right. That's right.
So they have these two different immune pathways that are very robust, and they develop all types of these different compounds that we call essential oils. And these are all compounds that plants produce as plant protectants to protect themselves from ultraviolet radiation, from disease attack, from insect attack, from overgrazing. And they have the capacity to kill. They have the capacity to not just softly, but to directly antagonize and go after all types of different diseases. So it's been a fascinating realization. And one part of this realization has been that the immune system, our immune system, and the immune system of a plant rests on the same foundations. The foundations of our immune system are nutrition and microbiome integrity. And a plant is exactly the same. It's nutrition and microbiome integrity. But we've completely ignored the microbiome for the last 90, 100 years because we haven't been able to measure it very well, and therefore we haven't been able to manage it well. But we now know that our microbiome, like in our bodies, we have, what is the number exactly? Like 10 times more microbial cells than we do the human cells in our body. we're now coming to understand that plants do have the same thing. Healthy plants should have 10 times more bacterial and microbial cells inside the plant than there are plant cells. But that doesn't happen in much of mainstream production agriculture because we destroy them by nuking them with fertilizers and fungicides and insecticides and everything else.
So it's the actual like chemical fertilizers that is destroying the microbiome?
Yes, without question.
Okay. And why is, like, if that's without question, why are we doing it?
Well, first, it's because it's what is familiar, it's what we've known, and it produced very positive and beneficial results initially. If you go back and look at the history, when nitrogen fertilizer was first introduced post Second World War, initially the initial early common application rates were 20 to 30 pounds an acre. And then it increased to 40 to 60 pounds an acre. And then over time, it increased further to 100 to 150. And now, depending on the crop and the context, we've got application rates upwards of 300. And the reason for that is initially the low doses of nitrogen fertilizer produced a very large crop response. The reality, if you go back and you read the historical agronomy records, which is a really fun pastime, one that I've enjoyed quite a bit, you'll find that they would get a greater plant response from baseline. So baseline is no fertilizer application, and then they put on 20 pounds of nitrogen. They got a far greater response then than we do today from 200 pounds of nitrogen.
Oh, really?
Yes, because their soil still had enough energy, had enough microbial energy. They put on a small amount of nitrogen, and they got this tremendous reaction. Today, our soils are exhausted. They are tired. They're drained. They've been drained of organic matter and drained of energy. And so it takes a lot more to produce a smaller response than it did 80 years ago.
So would you say that back then, when they first started using nitrogen, the big response, this big production increase in yield was due because the microbiome of the soil was healthy, even though maybe we didn't know that or understand that. Then we added like an extra boost of vitamin something, and then it just shot up like
Vitamin
crazy.
N.
Vitamin N for nitrogen, yes. And then it just shot up.
Yeah, I think, look, it depends on which region and what context you're talking about. We already had some soils in the eastern U.S. seaboard. We had soils in Europe that had already been quite degraded with plowing and with tillage. So we had soils that had already had degraded to some degree, but they still had enough organic matter and they still had enough fertility and enough biology that adding a small amount of fertilizer produced a very large crop response, a proportionally much larger response than it does today.
Okay. You just spoke a little bit about tilling. Now, I'm not a farmer. I don't understand it, but there's all this no tilling, yes tilling, half tilling. What's the deal with tilling when we're talking about this?
Oh, it's a great useful tool to create division among people and to prevent unification to actually achieve what actually matters.
Okay. Expand on that, please.
If there's anything that I have an allergy to, it's dogma. It's,
okay.
Dogmatic positions that we must never till, that tillage is a universal destructive. I got asked this question so often that I wrote an article on this topic. It turned out to be one of the most popular articles that I ever wrote, and many people told me it's one of the best articles they'd ever written. It was titled Deliberate Disturbance.
Deliberate, okay.
And the point that I made is when describing the detrimental or the perceived detrimental effects of tillage, people have they describe all these negative associations with physical soil disturbance. The point that I wanted to make is that, first of all, disturbance is not universally negative. There are many, if you have, and remove the conversation from soil for a minute and just speak about outside of agriculture in a human context, there are many cases where being in equilibrium, or you could say being in a comfort zone, if you want to make progress, if you want to improve, you have to get out of the comfort zone. So disturbance is a good thing. We need disturbance to move ourselves out of the comfort zone and to propel us to make positive change. So I'm not of the persuasion that disturbance is inherently a negative. Disturbance can be a positive if it's intentional, well-designed, well-managed. That's the first point. The second point is, I would suggest there are 3 different types of disturbance relative to soil. Soil is often described using a Venn diagram of these 3 different circles, and they talk about soil physical structure and soil chemistry balance and soil biology. They frame it in those 3, like the soil is often described as this 3-legged stool with those 3 foundational pillars. Well, if that's an accurate framing, the reality is you can disturb that stool by disturbing any one of the 3 legs. So you can have tillage, which is a physical disturbance, which can be detrimental or positive depending on how you manage it. You can have a chemical disturbance by overloading a soil with fertilizers or fungicides and insecticides, and that disturbance can be more detrimental than a tillage disturbance in some contexts. And then you can also have the biological disturbance, which results from the pesticide applications and so forth. So this whole conversation about tillage versus no-till is a divisive conversation that doesn't lend itself to us truly coming together and figuring out what actually matters, what actually moves the needle, what actually helps us to regenerate our soils. Because in some contexts, in some cases, tillage can be very positive, I am persuaded. And in some cases, it's extremely detrimental, absolutely.
Interesting.
I've never heard that answer from one person.
No.
It's either been one or the other.
Yeah.
So the environment and the soil and what would be the factors to consider whether to,
Let me give you a couple of examples.
Sure.
We work with a number of farmers up in the Dakotas, North Dakota area, where they have this incredibly fertile, rich black soil, lowest soils, high silt content. And in a low rainfall environment, these silty soils are very highly wind erodible. If you till soil in that environment, it is going to blow. It's going to move. It doesn't matter if you plant a cover crop in it, if you till it one day and you plant a cover crop in it the next day. By the time that cover crop has emerged and you've got 6 to 8 inches of growth and reasonable soil coverage, that soil will have blown. You've lost maybe a 1/4 inch of an 1/8 of an inch, depending on weather conditions and so forth.
Wow, okay.
But that soil will move. In that environment, in that context, tillage is 99% of the time is going to be detrimental from a long-term soil health improvement perspective.
Because of the rest of the weather surrounding it.
Exactly. And
because of the wind.
And because of the wind and because of that soil structure.
And that soil type.
And that soil type, what it's made of. Now, you go to the eastern half of the United States where you have a high rainfall environment, 40 plus inches of rainfall a year. And generally, because of that high rainfall, they have much more highly weathered soils. They have more clay particles, more clay soils. In many of those soils, if they have been abused historically, perhaps with improper tillage, perhaps with improper animal management, if you have the top 6 or 8 or 12 inches of that soil being extremely compacted and have a high clay content soil, the only way to effectively remediate that in any reasonable timeline is with a tillage pass of some type. There are people who want to say, well, you can resolve that with plant root systems. You can grow roots, and you should use roots and not iron to resolve that. The answer is yes, you can in 2 decades.
So 20 years.
How patient are you willing to be?
Or do tillage and it's faster.
Exactly.
Okay.
You can solve in a year, and then The follow-up management, of course, is just make sure that you don't repeat the management practice if you can possibly avoid it that created that situation in the first place.
Yeah, that's true.
Like that's huge.
Yeah.
I mean,
That
so
totally
you have
makes
to
sense.
you have to understand what caused the damage in the first case.
Yep. So obviously you've heard of the Dust Bowl in the
Oh yeah.
in the past 30s, I think it was.
Yep.
That was largely caused by overplowing in an environment where that was not
Exactly.
the right thing. Is that correct?
Overplowing plus drought.
Plus drought.
Yeah.
And the drought was possibly also caused by plowing or not?
Oh well, certainly was a contributing factor.
Oh, yeah.
We don't know to what degree. I haven't played. I don't know if we even have records back then of what the weather patterns looked like. But
So in our area here, you're not too familiar with it, but we have very high winds, starting about right now till about middle of April. And the fields are currently bare, and I've been very surprised at the percentage of fields that are plowed. So we have extreme dust walls coming over, like it's just incredible. What's the solution?
well, I don't want to be crude, but there is this very memorable quote that has really gained traction in North American audience. The tagline, "Don't farm naked."
I'll write that one down.
Yeah, get the soil covered. Look, as I've learned more, and we'll get more into this tomorrow, but as I've learned more about this biological approach to nutrition, how do you manage that? How do you make that practical? How do you make it real? You start paying a lot of attention and asking the question, well, what is suppressing our soil microbial communities? What keeps those microbes dormant or prevents them from being active and from providing nutrition in the way that God designed them to? And I've come to the conclusion that the top two most detrimental factors are usually, again, there's variation here in different contexts, but the number one is usually bare soil exposed to the sun. Number two is fungicides. And only number three do you have tillage and fertilizer applications. That's in most settings. Those are the things that are most harmful. So if you have, when you consider the topsoil environment, the A horizon that we're farming and that most plant roots are in, that might be 6 inches, 8 inches, 10 inches deep, depending on the soil type. And let's call it 8 inches deep for the sake of discussion. If you have bare soil that is exposed to sunlight, it's very common for the soil surface to reach 140 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit. And you can measure that very easily with an infrared thermometer. If you have a soil that is 140 degrees of the soil surface, it's very common for it to reach 110 degrees 4 inches down. Well, biology thrives and feeds and extracts nutrients and minerals from the soil using enzymes and enzymatic digestion. And enzymes get denatured. This is why we pasteurize milk. Enzymes get denatured at 110 degrees Fahrenheit. So that means if you have bare soil exposed to the sun in warm weather, you have just obliterated the entire microbial community in the top half of your topsoil horizon. So that means it doesn't matter what cover crops you added or what inoculants you added or what other things you did. You've just prevented that biology in the top half of your topsoil profile from being able to effectively deliver nutrients to the crop. So you've, in effect, created a crop that is addicted to soluble fertilizers.
Like nitrogen.
And phosphorus.
because through this extreme heat, you kill the life out of the soil.
Or I don't know if I would say you kill it, although that's certainly possible, but at the very least, you make it go dormant. It might be there, it's just dormant.
Because of that heat.
Because of the heat.
So after 30, 40, 50, almost 100 years of farming in this area and applying more and more fertilizers and more nitrogen in both, liquid form through the irrigation system and also in granular form, there are comments. Well, the soil right now it can't even digest if we. So if you have corn and you take it off and you do tillage and you turn the soil around and well that corn stalk and the corn straw that's not going to even degrade over time over the first 12 months just because the soil is essentially dead
Ouch.
or it's not doing much.
Ouch.
So the cycle. Sorry.
No, please explain it better.
So just so you understand how the corn cycle here works is corn is planted and then harvested, and then the straw is either baled or burnt. Nothing stays on the field. It's all removed.
Sounds like a very effective mining process.
It is a very effective mining process.
And then it is worked either by plowing, or many don't plow, but it's worked to where it's completely bare. You'll see that tomorrow when we drive around. You'll clearly see everywhere. There's not a shred of straw anywhere. It is just exposed to the sun. And that's how it's laying from when it's harvested all the way till it's planted. Completely bare, just sunshine. And we have most days are pure sunshine.
Yeah.
In this area.
I mean, 300 and call it 40, 50 odd days on record per year where we have sunshine.
Yeah, and wind. So that's
lots of wind.
That's what we're exposed to. So then definitely, according to what you're saying, the first 4 inches, they either have gone dormant or even died. Anything alive in there. And the next year it's repeated. And that has been repeated now for, 35 years?
Decades.
Yeah, decades.
Yeah.
The exact same crop, the exact same method, over and over and over and over.
With more and more fertilizer being added year after year, right? Because the results aren't there if you don't.
That's right.
Yep.
So every year fertilizer is increased on top of having all this bare soil.
Yep.
So now you know a little bit about the way it kind of is here. If we were to ask you to step in and change one piece of land, what would be the first thing you'd do?
Well, let me say that the scenario that you describe is a familiar one. It's the environment is different. The climate is different, but the fundamentals are the same no matter where you go.
So this would even apply to all kinds of ranges of weather and...
Yeah, but I wanted to respond specifically to corn, and then I'll get into this in a little bit. I'll answer your question.
Mm-hmm.
It's now probably, I forget the exact timeline. It was probably 9 or 10 years ago. I got a phone call from a good friend of mine who's a longtime consultant, 40-plus year agronomy consulting career in Iowa. And he got a call from a group of farmers in Nebraska. And this one farm operation in particular is about a, 12, 13,000 acre operation. They had, for years, consistently been getting corn yields in the 200 plus bushel per acre range with irrigation. And they dropped to 70s and 80s. And it's like they literally just fell off a cliff and they couldn't get back up. And they had those abysmal yields for 2 years. And it was at the end of the second year, they called Michael and they were like, we have to figure this out. They were desperate to try to understand what is happening, what was going on. And similar to the environment that you're describing, or to the ecosystem or the system that you're describing, they were growing corn on corn year after year with bare soil during the winter months, taking off the corn stubble, using it for bedding in feedlots and so forth. And the short version is that in spite of them having rich black soil, that soil had become degraded to the point that the organic matter that was there was non-functional. They had organic matter, but it was particulate organic matter. There was no longer living biology there. And they had accumulated pesticides And specifically, they had accumulated a large enough glyphosate load. They had used enough glyphosate, enough Roundup, that enough had accumulated in their soil that they fell off the edge of the cliff because of pesticide accumulation. And so the scenario that you asked me about as what would we do in a situation like this is not an unfamiliar scenario. The reality is this particular farm that I just spoke about, they were on the same track as tens of thousands of other farms are on right now. They just happen to be unlucky enough to win the marathon. They reached the finish line first because they were very intense. They were seed producers, and they managed their soils very intensely. They managed their pesticide applications very intensely. They just hit the figurative brick wall first.
Okay.
And they've been followed by many other people since then. And so, what the second part, and I'll get to the answer to your question in just a bit here about what I would do on a corn production system. But a point that I'd want to make is that as of this point in our consulting work, we have worked in desert environments, in tropical environments, in rainforest environments, with crops ranging from bananas to coffee to dryland wheat with 8 inches of rainfall per acre per year. The foundational principles are universal. Plant physiology is the same no matter where you go. Plants have the same immune systems. They have similar nutrition requirements. Now, the local details are all, they're the frosting on top of the cake, but plants' requirements for water, sunlight, nutrition, microbiome, those fundamentals are the same no matter where you go. And so to bring it down to nuts and bolts and to answer your question about a corn operation, I'm answering this question, and I'm comfortable answering this question, but I'm answering this question blind. With what you've just described, I know nothing about that, the productivity history, what yields have been like, what historical nitrogen application has been like. But I would make this as a set of recommendations based on principles, these foundational principles. And this set of recommendations is a starting point from which to customize. You customize to fit the different a given operation. So let's just say that a corn crop has a current nitrogen applications of 200 pounds per acre. And the place that I would begin is two things. One is I would make a recommendation for a microbial inoculant as a seed treatment. It is one of the least expensive and greatest ROI things that a grower can do. It costs $3 to $5 an acre and usually responds very, very well. But in order to give that biology the best opportunity to thrive, then we need to not have that soil be overly saturated with nitrogen. So I don't know about in this region, but in many parts of the United States and Canada, it's very common to front load majority or all of your nitrogen application. The majority goes on at planting or before planting. I would split that up. And so I'm framing this conversation just in terms of nitrogen for the moment. So where a grower would typically have applied 200 units of nitrogen at planting or pre-plant, I would now ask that we switch that up and we do a maximum of 40 units at planting. And we plan on doing another 40 units, either side dress or top dress in the V3 to V5 stage. And that we then plan to come in with 2 foliar applications of 10 pounds each of liquefied urea as foliars at about VT to R1 stage in there, and the two separate foliar applications. And there are other things that we would do. I would make a recommendation for combining sulfur with those first two nitrogen applications. I want a total of about 25 pounds of sulfur with those total of 80 units of nitrogen. And I would like to add some molybdenum, and I'd like to add some sugars and stuff to that. But so I'll talk about that a bit more tomorrow. But then something very interesting happens. We now have quite a bit of experience with foliar applications of urea. And the data is very clear that in terms of a yield response and a plant growth response, a pound of nitrogen as urea foliar produces the same crop response as 4 to 7 pounds of nitrogen applied to the soil.
Oh, wow. 1 to 4.
1 to 4. That's conservative.
That's conservative.
That's a conservative number, is 1 to 4. So I've put on 2 applications of 10 pounds each toward the latter stages. And if you take that total of 20 pounds and multiply it times a 1 to 4 ratio, that's the equivalent of 80 pounds of soil applied nitrogen. Well, that's a pretty substantial cost savings right there, right off the top of the bat. But you take the total of what I just described, 40 units, 10, and 10, 100 units of total nitrogen, plus 25 pounds of sulfur, plus some other goodies, that will produce the exact same or greater crop yield response as 200 units of nitrogen. Been there, done that 100 times plus.
Like, no problem.
This is standard.
This is common sense standard.
This is what we do. It's a routine course. Now, we'll take this base recommendation and we'll customize it to fit what makes sense. Do they have a strip till unit? How are they planting? There's all kinds of customization and variation from this. But that's kind of the foundational baseline that we start from. And why does this matter? Why do we manage nitrogen differently? Because if you put 200 pounds of nitrogen in the furrow or close to the furrow at planting, it will shut down that biology and prevent that biology from ever expressing itself for the rest of the growing season. You've now created a fertilizer-dependent plant for the rest of the season. And if you just meter it out and you space it differently, you give that biology right at planting the opportunity to establish itself, to establish a community, and begin extracting nutrients from the soil and making them available to plants. And you don't kill it right from the get-go. That's the reason why we're spreading it out. We're spacing it out in time and spacing out the application amounts to give the biology an opportunity to thrive.
Would you say that when you talk about applying the nitrogen in the furrows or on the ground, are we talking about liquid nitrogen, like a 132?
Yeah, like a liquid 32, liquid 28.
Okay, something like that.
Yep.
Versus a foliar application.
Can you ask your question again?
So you would say you would rather go with a like a foliar spray application of nitrogen.
I would prefer that, yes.
Yes.
For 2 reasons. The first is we get this disproportionately larger crop response. We get much greater nitrogen efficiency from the foliar than we do from the soil. That's reason number 1. And we need to apply fewer pounds, so there's an economic gain there.
Okay.
And in the current environment, that matters an awful lot. There's a direct economic gain from applying foliars. But secondly, the second reason is that when you apply foliar urea, that enhances plant photosynthesis. You get a yield response from it, but you also get a direct sugar response from it, and that sugar response results in more sugars going out through the root system as root exudates to stimulate soil biology. And so you have this interesting effect where if you put, let's say instead of 10 pounds of nitrogen, or 10 pounds, let's say instead of 10 pounds of nitrogen, 10 pounds of urea as a foliar, you put on 40 pounds on the soil, that will have a temporary suppressive effect on the soil biology. If you put 10 pounds on the plant, that will have a temporary positive effect on soil biology.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
I get it now.
Yeah, totally.
Because the plant is pushing something back in.
The plant puts sugars into the soil in response to the nitrogen fertilization.
Whereas if you do it in the ground, the plant is blocked, or the ground is blocked from ever using the biology of that it naturally has.
What happens is when, in terms of, I spoke earlier about the plants have this microbiome that colonize the entire plant, the root system, the leaves. There is no place on or in the plant that does not have all kinds of bacteria in it. But particularly in the soil, the plant has this symbiotic relationship with these soil microbes, and the plant is calling the shots because the plant essentially trades sugars for nutrients. So it tells the biology, hey, I need more phosphorus, and here's this sugar. You go get me the phosphorus. The biology takes the sugar packet, uses that as a fuel source, and goes and gets phosphorus for the plant. Well, if you want to kill that process, it's very easy. You just make sure that there's generous amounts of phosphorus in the furrow, and the plant says, hey, I have plenty of free phosphorus. Bacteria, I don't need you. I'm not going to give you any of my sugar. I want all the sugar for myself. And so it doesn't feed the biology because it has an abundance of free nitrogen and free phosphorus right there in the root zone.
This is, I mean, I'm not even a farmer. My mind's blown already. Like,
This is crazy.
okay, so, okay, no, you go ahead, Benny. I gotta formulate my questions here a bit more.
I don't see any steam coming out of you.
Oh man.
I am beginning to get it on a very minimal level, but it totally starts making sense. But for the sake of time, I'm going to ask very pointed questions. I hope that's okay.
And you want me to keep my answers brief. I'll give it my best shot.
What you've done so far is very, very good. Is it possible to turn a farming operation that has been on this track, like we've been saying, for 35 years, let's say, and slowly just becoming less and less profitable? Is it possible to turn that around and actually make it more profitable? And when I say more profitable, I mean money in the bank.
Yes.
You wanted a short answer. There it is, Benny.
Couldn't get much shorter.
Yes. And it's possible to do so without what is referred to as the yield J curve.
Where you drop the yield.
There has been this expectation, or this dogma again. I'll use this dogma word that I have an allergy to. There's been this expectation that when you shift from one type of agronomy management to another, you should expect to have a yield loss for a period of time until your soil health improves.
Yes.
Well, that flat out doesn't work economically for any farm that I know of.
No. That's the fear.
Yeah, it just doesn't work. And so, I became really inspired by, I haven't really gone into much detail yet on my personal story, but on the farm that I grew up on, as I was learning about plant immune systems and learning about this different form of agronomy, I became really inspired by the idea that we could grow plants that were resistant to diseases and insects and eliminate the need for insecticide and fungicide applications. And we did that in 2 growing seasons. In 2004, we were very intense pesticide applications. By the end of that season, we decided we need to go in a different direction. 2006, we were completely pesticide-free.
Completely pesticide-free.
Completely pesticide-free.
All these worms and spiders and all these little critters.
Solved.
All gone.
In 2 growing seasons.
Yes.
And you didn't lose money during those 2 growing seasons?
No. We made more money than we ever had before.
Okay.
But the point that I wanted to make is this was a lot of fun, but I soon came to realize that there was much more to the story, that when we had these plants that were robustly healthy and they were resistant to diseases and insects, there were 2 other things happening that I found so intriguing. The first was that we were actually improving soil health while we were growing a crop. We had somehow had this idea that farming is by its very nature inherently extractive, that we're extracting nutrients and we're extracting organic matter from the soil, and that in order to replenish the soil, we need to grow something else. We need to grow cover crops, we need to add compost, we need to do all these different things. And you think about that for a moment. Okay, we're growing a crop and we're removing, and then we're going to grow a cover crop and add back. How does that compute exactly? And I came to realize, this is probably more than I have time to go into, but I came to realize that when you have really healthy plants, you can actually build soil organic matter and soil health while you are growing a crop. If you go back into the agronomic literature of the 1960s and 1970s, if you asked the agronomists of the time the fastest way to build soil health, the common answer, the prevailing opinion of the time, was the fastest way to build soil health is to grow corn.
Really?
Yes. Today, we have the idea that the fastest way to lose soil organic matter is to grow corn. And the reason for that belief, and it was very appropriate and it was accurate, was that corn as a C4 photosynthetic pathway plant, is a very efficient photosynthesizer. It's one of the most efficient plants we have at absorbing carbon dioxide and moving it into the soil and building organic matter. So what's changed between 1970 and today? Well, lots of things have changed, but amongst them, the quantity of nitrogen that we're applying is one significant contributing factor, but that's another conversation. I'm getting off the rails here. I'm sorry. I know you wanted a short answer.
That's okay.
The other aspect that I realized, we're growing these healthy plants, they're resistant to diseases and insects, they're regenerating soil health, and they are contributing medicinal value to people. When we grow plants that have these robust immune systems, and not only are they resistant to diseases and insects, but they transfer that immunity to the livestock and the people who consume them as food.
Is this proven?
Yes, this is 40-year-old research where, or it's been ongoing for 40 years and longer, where people have been studying all kinds of different plant compounds, many of which I'm sure you would recognize, like lycopene in tomatoes, or resveratrol in red wine, or lycopene in watermelons, or anthocyanins in blueberries. These are all specific compounds that have been studied for their immune-enhancing effect in people. They have anti-cancer property, they are antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal, on and on the list goes. And, well, as it turns out, those, what we call phytonutrients, plants, every single plant produces these compounds. Most plants produce hundreds or thousands of different compounds of these types, and they are what provides the plant with flavor and aroma. These are the flavor compounds and the aroma compounds. Those are the foundation of a plant's immune system. And they enhance our immune system. So all of a sudden, we can start having a legitimate conversation about food as medicine. When we are growing plants that have these robust immune systems, we are also providing a public health benefit because we are growing food that has exceptional nutritional value and enhancing our immune systems.
If the
Plant is healthy.
Yes.
the plant and the produce has these nutrients.
Yeah, if the plant is susceptible to diseases and insects, then the people and animals who eat it will be too. They'll also be susceptible
You
to
gotta be
diseases.
kidding.
No, it follows all the way through. It's the way God designed it. So
that
we've
makes
drifted far from your original question, but
It's all good.
I've come to the persuasion that the opinion, and this opinion is based on lots of experience, that if you have a yield loss during the transition period, it is not because of regenerative agriculture. It's because of poor agronomy. It's simply whoever was doing the agronomy, whoever was making the recommendations, was not paying attention and wasn't managing the transition well. This approach to plant nutrition, the simplest way to describe it is to say that we need to provide an off-ramp for chemistry dependency for these water-soluble fertilizers while providing an on-ramp for biological nutrition.
At the same time.
At the same time. And it's an art and it's a science because the two antagonize each other, but the chemistry antagonizes the biology. So it has to be managed carefully. But, and this is I think, been one of the foundations of our success. To go back to your question, we started this approach. I started advancing eco-agriculture in 2006. And from the very beginning, one of my mantras was that we should never guess about something that is possible to measure. Let's not guess about how effective we are, how effective biology is at delivering nutrients. Let's measure it. So we started measuring plant leaves multiple times during the growing season to see exactly what is the soil capable of delivering, actually, truly, and what do we need to compensate for. And when you do that, you develop a lot of experience, a lot of perspective across a lot of acres. The bottom line is, if you use data to make informed decisions during the growing season, you can manage this off-ramp for chemistry and the on-ramp for biology without having yield losses. without having yield declines. And in fact, not always, this doesn't happen all the time, but I would say between 65% of the time, maybe as much as 70% of the time, when we begin working with a new farm in a new environment, we can expect to see substantial yield responses and yield increases. I'll give you one example. I forget the exact timeline, but let's call it roughly a decade ago, we started working with James Johnson, who was a cotton grower in New Mexico. And prior to working with James, as a company, we knew nothing about cotton. None of our team had ever worked with cotton. I had never, as far as I know, I had never seen a cotton plant. I wouldn't have recognized a cotton plant if you showed me one. So we know nothing about cotton, but we have a lot of experience dealing with crops. They're different plant. We understand plant physiology and soil microbiology reasonably well. We started working with James. We gave him a set of recommendations. We customized it through the season. We get to harvest, and he's got a 40% higher cotton yield on the cotton that we were managing than they have ever had on that farm before. A 40% higher yield than they had on the neighboring fields around it in a high cotton production year. And so this is this can sometimes be the benefit of a fresh perspective. So often, there's an analogy here with human health where someone isn't feeling well, they go to the doctor evaluates their symptoms and gives them, recommends a drug, recommends a prescription. A few months go by, things change in one direction or another. They now have other effects showing up, other symptoms showing up. They go back, they get another prescription, and then they get another prescription. And time goes by, a few years go by, and they end up taking a handful of prescriptions that arguably they might be better off without any of them. But the point is that at every point on that journey, the doctor never intended harm. The doctor always intended to help the patient with the best information that he knew at the time. And we have the exact same scenario in agriculture, except our timeline is measured in years and in growing seasons instead of months, where over time we have adapted things in different settings that when you look at them from an outside fresh perspective, you scratch your head and you say, this makes no sense whatsoever. And that was the scenario in cotton production. We started working with cotton, and we know nothing about cotton. And we see that they're doing two things at the same time. One is they're putting on large quantities of nitrogen, and the second is they're doing 7 to 10 applications of a growth regulator called PIX during the growing season.
Yeah, it's common.
Well, that's like driving with one foot on the accelerator and the other foot on the brake and mashing them both to the floor. It makes no sense. It makes no sense whatsoever. And so we looked at that, and just to give you some context here, when PIX is applied to a plant, it completely shuts down photosynthesis for about a 3-day period, and it takes about 7 to 10 days for it to fully recover and start photosynthesizing again. At which point, growers are putting on another PIX application.
Yes.
So you want to talk about shutting down the plant's energy and preventing it from being effective at producing yield, that'll do it. So our approach was to say, all right, let's put on just a little bit of nitrogen at planting, and let's use leaf samples during the growing season, and we will apply, because James had the capacity, he had irrigation, he had the capacity to fertigate. We said, all right, we have the ability to fertigate. We are going to put more nitrogen in the fertigation when the crop tells us it needs it, and not before. And the result was we got to the end of the growing season, and we had put on 40 units of nitrogen instead of 200, and not a single PIX application. And he had 40% greater yield.
So why are people being recommended to put on PIX?
Because they're putting on 200 units of N.
Oh.
This goes back to my doctor analogy.
Right.
If you go back 30 years ago, or you look at the progression over time, we didn't get here on day one. with either
Right.
200 units of N or 10
This didn't
applications
happen
of PICs.
over one night.
It happened gradually, one step
Right.
at a time, one step at a time. The agronomists never intended harm, just like the doctor never intended harm. But gradually, over time, nitrogen applications increased and plant growth regulator applications increase and insecticide applications increase until we've worked ourselves into a corner where we're just like the human patient for the doctor that is now addicted to a double handful of medications that we'd be better off without. But you have to transition off those gradually.
Right.
Interesting.
Like, I'm almost ready to become a farmer.
It's a pretty exciting time. You know, what is interesting is that the knowledge, there have been many pioneers in this space who've pointed to observations and practical applications and experience where they were using cover crops, they were using compost, they're using different things, and they've been pointing the direction in a different direction, saying there is a different pathway, and this is what it might look like. But the science behind it of how do you actually do it effectively on scale is relatively new. The understanding the science of how plants absorb nutrients from bacteria instead of from soluble ions has really only been understood for the last 10 or 15 years.
Oh, really?
It's relatively new. We had hints. We understood that it worked. We could measure it, but we didn't really know how it worked. And so, of course, once you know how something works, you're able to manage it much more effectively.
Well, then you can start measuring it.
Exactly.
Right. And so where did you guys come in this going from soluble to the microbiome? Like, how did you guys get introduced to it, and what have you contributed, or what are you working with in that aspect right now?
Well, I'm going to answer your question with a personal story. So I grew up on a family fruit and vegetable farm, was fascinated by the agronomy and the plant nutrition management. I graduated from school at age 14. I started doing all the drip irrigation, all the spraying, did all the pesticide applications. I was a licensed pesticide applicator when I was 16 years old. I came from the other side of the railroad tracks, so to speak.
Right.
Very intimately familiar with that world because we were there. My father was a licensed pesticide distributor. We were the vendor and the supplier to our community. Where was I going with this? What was your question?
So where did you guys get involved in this process and this new type of application?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So while I was learning about agronomy from the mainstream model, this model of plants absorbing simple ions from the soil solution, we went to visit a local park not far from us. It was a bit generous to be a buggy's drive, but we drove there, maybe 15 miles or so from where I grew up. There's a small state park called Nelson Ledges State Park. And Nelson Ledges State Park is where the glaciers dropped a large sheet of rock that, I don't know, it covers maybe 15, 20 acres in size, and it's probably 15 to 20 feet thick. And they dropped this sheet of rock on rolling ground. And so as you can imagine, this large sheet of rock cracked and fissured. There's all kinds of canyons and crawl spaces for little boys to run through and to jump across when their mother isn't watching. And it was a great place to go play and to spend an afternoon. There are trees growing on the flat surface and along the edges on this rock. Maple trees, oak trees, hickory trees. They are as tall, as big as all the trees in the forest around them.
But they're growing on a rock.
Their roots are spread out across rock. There is no soil.
What?
There has never been soil. There was never any soil on those rocks. Their roots are going down the side of the cliff faces. You can see them very clearly there. And so I was fascinated by plants. I was studying plants, and I paid close attention to these trees. It was so fascinating. And I had this question, well, if these trees can only absorb nutrients from water-soluble ions, then where are these trees getting nutrition?
Right.
I mean, it doesn't work.
Yeah, it doesn't work like that.
It doesn't work in that scenario. So I was always puzzled by that question. And then a few years went by. There was on one edge of this cliff face, was growing along the edge of the forest, and the trees were reaching out to the sunlight. So along one edge, there's several trees that are growing from the top edge of the cliff at about a 30 to 40 degree angle. And we would love to run out those tree trunks 12 or 15 feet. And at some point, someone figured that based on the traffic that those tree trunks received, it obviously wasn't just us that were having fun. You're 15, 20 feet off the ground. Someone considered that to be a safety hazard and cut those trees off. When we went back to visit, I saw those tree stumps. The first thing I did was to walk over and look at those tree stumps and look at the growth rings. And the growth rings are every bit as big as they are on the trees 50 yards away that they had cut down in the forest. They're the exact same size. These trees are growing as rapidly on the rock as they are in a foot of topsoil. So that was the opening question mark for me, saying, well, this is the way we've been taught it works, but there's obviously more to the story. And this is such a beautiful story. I'll talk about it more tomorrow at the event, but for the benefit of everyone who's listening, it is worth talking about the beauty of how this has been created. So, come to find out, just recently in the last couple of decades, that plant roots have the ability to absorb entire bacterial cells. They absorb bacteria, and these bacteria move throughout the entire plant. The entire plant is colonized by bacteria, and it's not just bacteria, it's also microalgae and also fungi. But once a microbial community lives inside the plant, those microbes that live inside the plant, we just generally categorize and classify as endophytes. And if you were in the farming community, I'm sure many people have heard about endophyte-free fescue, for example, or endophyte-free plants, because some endophytes can produce toxins. Well, as it turns out, these microbes have a symbiotic relationship with the plant, where the plant can tell the microbes, hey, I don't have enough of nutrient A, B, or C. I don't have enough zinc, or I don't have enough manganese, or I don't have enough phosphorus. And the microbial community that is out in the soil, sometimes at a distance of yards away from the plant, will immediately selectively begin extracting that mineral from the soil mineral matrix and transporting it back into the plant. There's this constant signaling that happens. And so you think about what I just said, and that means that if that process is truly working, then you should never see deficiency symptoms, and you should never have nutrient excesses. And that is why when you go into wild ecosystems that are undomesticated and unmanaged, you often don't see nutrient deficiency symptoms, except in very extreme scenarios where there isn't any there in the parent soil geology, because the microbes have the ability to be selective in what they absorb for plants. But as soon as you go into an agriculture environment, that process breaks down because we've nuked it with fertilizers. And so over the last decade, we have been learning how to regenerate this microbial process of roots feeding on bacteria and using that process to supply all of a crop's nitrogen and phosphorus and nutrient requirements so that the plants don't experience deficiencies. Because the reality is, this is such a beautiful design. This is how God designed it to work, and it's the system that we have unwittingly, we didn't know when we first started using fertilizers and pesticides, but unwittingly we have destroyed that system.
And now we have to supplement with other things.
Well, now we're stuck in a groove of Band-Aids and pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
That's incredible.
You mentioned AEA, that you started it in 2006 before. tell us a bit more about exactly what does AEA do? Because I've been on your website, I found different things on there, but I'd like for you to tell our listeners what you guys do.
Yes, we do it. The short version is that following the transition that we made on our farm, my father was also the regional supplier, as I already mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And so very rapidly, growers started bringing in soil analysis and bringing in tissue analysis and asking me to make recommendations for them, to the point where in the middle of the summer in 2006, my father reached a frustration threshold, and he said, look, you can either continue to help manage our farm or you can help manage other people's farms, but don't try to do both.
Makes sense.
And that led to the starting of Advancing Eco-Agriculture. We started initially only as a consulting company. It was myself and a couple of other people, and we started doing consulting work for just putting together nutrition management and cultural management practices to manage a transition for disease and insect resistance, was what we were first really known for. And then we first started working a lot in the fruit and nut and high-value crop space. Well, then, fairly rapidly, that began to expand to broadacre crops, and our reputation started to change, where we first had a reputation for disease and insect resistance. All of a sudden, we started having a reputation for not just greater disease and insect resistance, but also for greater yields, which, when you stop to think about it, is kind of obvious, because when you have a healthier plant, how are you going to stop yields from increasing?
Right.
So that then, but there were several, we started in 2006, and over time, I became increasingly frustrated. It was, I don't know how the marketplace is here in Mexico, but there was, at that point, we really had a challenge finding products for some specialty use cases. We wanted to make recommendations for cobalt applications and molybdenum applications and selenium applications and some unusual trace minerals that weren't commonly and readily available. And that frustration and some of the we missed out on some crop results because of not having those products. In 2009, we started doing product testing and development. In 2012, we first released products into the field. And so
that you yourself produced.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so those products are, we don't produce anything that is really a competitor with a mainstream commodity product like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. It's more the specialty plant nutrients and the microbial inoculants that are facilitators for this transition. And so we've continued. We now, we do consulting only, or we do consulting with products, or we do products only, depending on what fits in a given context. But when we look at a farm situation, we look at what are the soil profiles, the chemistry profile, the biology profile, what is the crop history, what are the historical management practices, and we will make a very thorough set of recommendations that, if, again, this is all context dependent, what fits for irrigation water quality improvements, what types of cover crops are a fit to solve certain disease or insect problems, what types of soil amendments might be a fit, what types of microbial inoculants are a fit, what are some of the things that you should stop doing with nitrogen applications and so forth. And as a part of that total set of recommendations, we recommend a small fraction of our products will be a part of that total set of recommendations. That's usually how we keep the lights on and pay our employees and so forth. So that's the general business model that people are most commonly familiar with and that we mostly use.
Okay. And you mentioned on a previous podcast that you had consulted and helped, if I understood the number correctly, over 4 million acres worth of farming land to convert and say, or to go off of pesticides and fungicides. And I don't know if chemical fertilizers was included in that list as well.
Yeah, it would be. That number is several years old at this point. We need to update it. I'm sure it's over 5 million at this point, but not that it matters, really. But when I say transition off, there are many growers who they want to do what is best for the land, what is best for the soil, best for the long-term future, and what is optimal economically. They're not particularly dogmatic. about wanting to be completely pesticide free or wanting to be organic.
Hmm.
And so it's very common for the growers that we work with to have, this is just very broad brushstrokes because this is across a wide range of different ecosystems and crops. But I would say it's common for growers to reduce their nitrogen and potassium applications by 50 to 60% within 2 years of working with us, sometimes more. It's very common to see pesticides being reduced by 70% within the first 2 years, sometimes more. But then from that threshold on, it's just a question of degrees of where do you want to go? How intense do you really want to be? And, many years ago, we were asked to work on cherries up in the Pacific Northwest in Washington, Oregon. And Mike Omeg, who's a very influential cherry grower in the region, approached us at a trade show, and he said, I've been directed by multiple people to come talk to you because I want to grow large, firm cherries that qualify for the export market, and I've been told that you can help me do that. I don't care about being organic. I don't want to reduce pesticides. I don't want to reduce fertilizers. I just want to produce premium quality cherries. So we worked with Mike for a couple of years. 3 years in, at the end of our third growing season, we do a review sitting across his desk, our third annual review, and Mike says, I told you guys I have no interest in being organic, but I don't have powdery mildew anymore. I don't have bacterial canker anymore. I don't have this anymore. I don't have that anymore. So, if I wanted to, I could be organic.
So he was listing all the diseases or problems he had with his production.
He had thought that he would be in a scenario where he would always be dependent on fungicides and insecticides, and all of a sudden, he wasn't anymore.
After working with you for 3 years?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, he hasn't chosen to go organic still to this day because his market doesn't reward him for that, and it's not something that he's personally passionate about. So he has those tools available to use when he needs them, as he needs them. And that's the decision that the majority of growers make, is there's not an ideological, dogmatic perspective or decision that, we have to eliminate 100% of pesticides. It's, yes, we recognize they're harmful. We'd like to use them as little as possible. But if we're in a situation where we need to use them to save the crop and to remain economically viable, we will absolutely do that.
And what about his big cherries that he was going after? Did he produce those?
This last year, so yes, he did produce those.
Okay.
We quickly, yes. Yeah, we have a pretty big flag we can carry about growing the best and the biggest cherries.
Really?
But what is so interesting, this last year, and this is just an expression of what's going on, many people are experiencing the macroeconomic environment. This last year, this is 3,000 plus acres of cherries. I forget the exact number. And our team member, Jim Dunlop, who works with Mike, said that they grew, this year was the cherry crop of a lifetime. They grew the largest, firmest cherries. Cherries are graded by row size. The smaller the count, the fewer rows go into a carton, the larger the cherries. Historically, a 9-row cherry was exceptional. Mike Omeg and Orchard View have occasionally produced 8-row cherries. This year, they produced a number of cherries that were 7-row cherries.
Wow!
I mean, you're talking about the size. You're talking about a cherry the size of a large chicken's egg.
Oh my goodness!
These things are incredible.
Serious?
Yes. And so Jim said this year was the cherry crop of a lifetime for quality and size and firmness and all these characteristics. And they had reduced inputs substantially across the entire operation. And the result of all that was they lost a little bit less money than everybody else.
They had lost a little bit less money than everybody else.
So here's another question that many people have asked. So if I try this, but my neighbor doesn't, he keeps on spraying all those chemicals and everything, and it blows across my field. What use is there? Really, my trial, my efforts are worthless because my neighbor doesn't.
Well, your expenses are a lot less. I would think that matters for something. I mean, again, we're not doing this for ideological reasons of trying to be pesticide free. If you're doing it for practical economic reasons, then
Yeah.
Yeah, but okay. I'm just trying to get at something. They say then it will destroy my efforts.
No, it won't.
No, it won't.
No, it won't.
Okay.
And why not?
Well, it's a question of degree.
Okay.
It's a question of degree of if you're applying, if you're getting, I don't know, make up a number, if you're getting 10% of the pesticide exposure and you're getting it on the edges of your field, you're not getting nearly the degree of pesticide exposure for your soil microbiome, and it's going to recover a lot faster. You're getting a lot fewer toxins, so the soil can metabolize it much more effectively.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
Perfect.
No, it's just one of those questions that people keep constantly saying and asking. Like,
Yep.
unless we do it as an entire community, what's the point? Like,
No,
just
it's
me and my
No, it's
200
absolutely
acres?
Not. It's absolutely not the case.
No.
No, I mean, my goodness, people are producing these types of results on a half an acre market garden in the middle of a golf course, which is an extremely toxic environment. So,
What I noticed on your podcast that you had with Mr. Kennedy was you rented a neighbor's piece of land and you kind of made it into one,
yeah,
and you kind of just planted the whole thing.
yeah,
And you were saying something like there was like a knife cut
yeah.
the difference between the land that you had been farming with a lot of chemicals. And so now you made it into one field, and the plant would go across the line there. And on one side it's healthy and the other side it's not. Is that correct?
Yes, that was quite a profound experience. So we had this one field that we've been farming for the prior decade plus in vegetables. So it was planted into produce every summer, into cover crops most every winter. Sometimes with a late season crop, we might not get it planted into cover crops. And of course, we were using biological type fertilizers, but we were also using very intense pesticide applications.
Mm.
And the neighboring field was being run by a dairy farm, and it was hay, small grains, 2 years of hay. Corn, small grains, 2 years of hay back into corn, or sometimes 3 years of hay, with dairy manure being applied and limestone being applied, and maybe an herbicide application on the corn, and maybe 1 or 2 sprays on the oats, and that was it. So these 2 fields were both long, narrow strips that were being tilled and planted up and down the slope because of how narrow they were. So we started renting this neighboring field, and we switched the road direction by 90 degrees and planted it across the former field border. And the soil that had the previous pesticide exposure, the previous vegetable production, at harvest time, those melons, those cantaloupe, had 80% of the leaves infected with powdery mildew. And the new soil that was in vegetables for the first time had 0.
Mm.
And when I say 0, I mean 0. Not 1 or 2 or 5, but 0. You could not find any powdery mildew in that section of the field. And these plants are spaced 2 feet apart in the row. And there is this clear boundary line right down through the center of this planting where this former field border had been.
Hmm.
So this was the 2004 growing season, and that was the experience that really caused my eyes to open wide and say, all right, what is happening here? What are the differences between these 2 plants? Why is one plant susceptible to powdery mildew when the next plant 2 feet away is resistant? What's the difference? It's the same fertilizer program, the same fungicide applications, the same plant variety, but 2 completely different outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what really got me started down the road of studying and trying to understand plant immune systems and how plants can become resistant to diseases and insects. And that's what led to studying the microbiome and studying nutrition management.
Mm. So basically, correct me if I'm wrong, but basically what I've picked up so far is you're thinking, instead of what else can I apply to make this plant produce like crazy, is what can I do to make the plant be healthy so that the God-given order can do its course by itself without me being the one injecting everything.
Exactly.
Is that what you're doing
That's
in a nutshell?
That is, in a nutshell, accurate. Mainstream agronomy for the last however many decades has focused on managing plant nutrition with an almost singular objective. One objective: produce the highest yields possible. Balance nutrition and irrigation and everything else to produce the highest yields possible, with minimal consideration given to quality. And what we are looking at the same system, but with a different pair of glasses, and saying, we want the highest yields possible, and we want quality. We want robust immune systems. We want disease and insect resistance. And when you have healthy plants that are resistant to diseases and insects, you can't stop yields from increasing.
So you will produce more.
You will produce more. What is
Right.
interesting, I believe that this model of agriculture will become mainstream in the next couple of decades, purely because of economics. Not because of any ideological reasons, not because people want to reduce pesticides, but because of economics. Because if you can see the pathway to substantially reducing your input costs, reducing pesticide costs, reducing fertilizer costs, while maintaining or increasing yields, where's the argument?
Yeah.
Why would you not do that?
Exactly.
Who would argue with that?
So the focus is not increase yields. The focus is increase plant health, and the result is increased yields.
And the result is increased profitability.
That's right.
Yeah, I would say that given the current state of the economic environment, the objective needs to be increased profitability.
That's right.
Not increase yields. And I would argue that in some environments, in some contexts, okay, you go north into North Texas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, some of those areas where there's lots of irrigated corn ground with pumping lots of water out of the Ogallala Aquifer and so forth. It's worth making the argument, I think. I don't think we should be growing corn there. Maybe we don't want, or maybe we shouldn't be growing irrigated corn there. Let's put it that way.
That's
maybe
a good
we
point.
don't. Maybe we don't want the highest yields there. We want peak profitability, and maybe peak profitability is dryland farming of corn or something else.
Me. No kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah,
100%.
it makes a lot of sense to produce 40% of our corn crop for ethanol production. No, it doesn't.
That makes a lot of sense, and it also makes a lot of sense to produce any crop in an area where it takes 10 times the effort and resources than it does versus producing it where it's naturally
Where it wants
abundant
to grow.
and grow, and where the resources are naturally available in many cases, right? So something that we often talk about, and I saw some more guys talking about it today, is it takes about 300 to 400 liters of water to produce 1 kilo of corn. Corn is measured in kilos in Mexico. And 1 kilo of corn is sold for about 3 pesos and 50 cents to 4 pesos, which equals about, 20 US cents per kilo, which would, if I do the math real quick, that's probably 8 to 9 US cents per pound. I have no idea how to convert that to bushels, by the way.
That's fine.
But the point is, we're using basically 500 liters of water. You can go up or down on that scale a bit, but we're using 500 liters of water to produce 1 kilo of corn, and 500 liters of water is being sold in the stores for about $500 to $1,000, depending on the brand of the water and how far it's been transported and all that fun stuff. So, but we're only getting 20 cents and a whole year's of work and labor.
Yeah.
And a lot of risk, and we're getting sicker, and our land is...
What, you're not even getting 20 cents. You're not breaking even on it in most cases.
No, I mean, we're not actually getting...
No.
We're not earning 20 cents.
Right.
The income is 20 cents, but the profit is minus something, right? And so obviously no longer an ideal environment to produce, corn on a massive scale. So looking for different crops, is that something that you guys have helped other areas, large areas? Like, for example, there's, I don't know, I'm going to take a stab at this, but probably 200,000 acres in the state of Chihuahua, could be a lot more, that produce corn. And we irrigate from wells that are about 1,200 to 1,800 feet deep, where the water table's around, on a good day, 300 feet. In most cases, it's more like between 500 and 700 feet deep.
And even deeper.
And even deeper. And we're using, 200 kVA transformers. We're using 200 horsepower electric motors. And we're getting approximately how many tons per hectare or per acre? It's about 7-8 tons per acre.
Yeah, between 6 and 8.
Okay, between 6 and 8. And, there was a time, as far as the farmers that I've interviewed and that you've spoken to, Benny, is that back in the day when no corn existed in this area, in the entire state as far as I'm concerned, there were guys that would start to farm corn, and they'd produce enough corn, to make a really good living from a small field. And not just a really good living, but they would grow, meaning one year they could maybe buy a vehicle, the next year they could pay for half of a house, and so on and so on. That is no longer the case, and something has happened in this transition over the last 60 years.
Mm-hmm.
And if we take a look at that, we're like, okay, but it's their livelihood here. This is what they live off of. This is what they've learned to do, and they enjoy it. They like it. They've gotten really good at producing high yields. Let's not talk about profitability, but I think very decent yields. Mm-hmm. So having said that, I really wish that we could find something where these farmers could become profitable again, and that would be a lot more in alignment with our natural environment.
Mm-hmm.
You wish that.
I really do, and I wish if I knew something...
But do they wish that?
Maybe 5 years ago, they probably didn't wish that. But I think there's a lot of guys right now that are starting to think about maybe wishing that.
And a few that are wishing it.
And a few that are because it's what they know. So it's very hard for them to just to say, well, I'm going to go into something brand new. And so I've dabbled personally with a group of farmers locally into new things. And again, I'm not a farmer, so let's be clear about that. But I've helped invest in different operations, from blueberries to blackberries to squash to different things like that in different circumstances. And while we've learned to produce yield, we have not learned to produce profit, except for with the squash, except we had an unusually rainy year last year. And so that was a different story altogether, but it was a phenomenal experience for us. Having said that, is there really no hope? Are farmers, have you ever seen a large group of farmers in an area change and say, you know what, this isn't working as good as it should or we'd like? And then we go and transition into something that is profitable and gives them hope and a future for them and their children, right?
Yes, I have on quite a number of occasions.
Could you give some examples?
A very recent example that is kind of in transition at the moment is a group of farmers from Iowa who said, we don't see a future in the corn and soybean game as it's currently being played. We want to add a third crop to the rotation for all of its agronomic benefits and everything else, and we want to be paid well for it. But there's no infrastructure that existed, and the crop they wanted to add was oats. They wanted to add oats to their corn and soybeans into the rotation. And so the solution was a $60 million mill to process oats and to be able to provide a market for the oats. So a group of farmers came together, and they all invested substantially and found some additional investment funding, built the mill. And so now all of a sudden there's a market for, I forget, 40 or 50,000 acres of oats that didn't exist previously.
Really?
That is paying farmers double the market price of oats.
Double the market price.
Double the market price that they invested in and built themselves. That's one recent example. There are many other examples of various scales and sizes. But I come back to the question that I asked because the willingness to be open and the willingness to engage in this question seriously is the entry point. That's the starting point. You have to start there. Once you start there, once you have the willingness to say, all right, yes, I'm willing to do something different, perhaps radically, substantially different, that opens your mind to all kinds of imagination. And I would suggest, perhaps even more so, giving the next generation, the younger generation, the opportunity, because younger people tend to inherently not have the biases. They're not trapped by history, if you will, to the same degree. They don't have the same degree of responsibility of the whole operation as a whole. So I can point to many individual operations that gave the next generation constrained opportunity. And so, sometimes constraints also focus and force creativity.
100%.
And saying, okay, I'm making it up here, we have a 3,000 acre farm here in Iowa. You can play with 20 acres. You can do whatever you want on those 20 acres. Well, you're not going to grow corn on 20 acres. And so those 20 acres turn into a flower farm, or they turn into a strawberry farm. I don't know. I know of a 20-acre strawberry operator run by a young man in Iowa that makes more money than the 1,000-acre corn farm that it got split off from.
Oh, my.
I know another 3-acre flower operation that makes more money than the 5,000-acre farm it got split off from.
You got to be kidding.
No, I'm completely serious. It's like those types of innovations. So we need to empower the younger, and not just empower them, but inspire the next generation to say, you can't do this. You can't grow corn and soybeans. You have to be innovative. You have to figure it out. And in order to force innovation, we're going to force constraints. Do it on 20 acres. There's a young lady in Michigan on a dairy farm who's making more money from a 40-cow organic dairy than her husband is making from a 3,000-cow conventional dairy.
Oh, my goodness.
And force constraints.
Force constraints.
That is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. Well, we could sit here all evening, so it seems like...
I'm just getting started, man. Tomorrow, and I'll say this here on the podcast, but tomorrow, something that I think... Okay, so let me put it like this. You have a wealth of knowledge and information and experience. And I'm not quite sure how to transfer the proper amount of it tomorrow.
In the few hours that we have.
In the few hours that we have, to give the local farmers somewhat of some type of clarity on what their next step is. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you can share any of that here here today to our online audience, or you want to leave that for tomorrow. But that, I take a look at all of this, and I've been involved in multiple businesses. I'm an entrepreneur at heart in that sense. And I can see that this is applicable into almost any area, right? I mean, you look at the health of an operation, not at the yield of the profitability, but if it's healthy, it will yield the right yield and be profitable, and so on and so on. There's just so much of that here. But I just really want to be able to really somehow convey something to the farmers tomorrow so that they can actually have a starting point. What can you share today yet?
Well, I think that's all that we can share is a starting point, because we can point in a certain direction, but then everyone has to go on their own journey. And I mean, as a company, foundationally, the work that we do as a company is being people's coaches on the journey, offering them guidance, giving them direction. We've put some online tools together to give people further information and guidance. We've put a tool together called Field Lark, and there's a bunch of tools that are available. But the short version is, let me answer your question this way. There's, in Australia, about 30% of all of the grazing land in Australia is now managed regeneratively. Specifically managed to regenerate soil health and improve soil health. And there's a lot of grazing land in Australia. 30% is a big number. And when I ask people from Australia, how did that come about? Who gets the credit for that? They all point to the same person. There's an amazing guy down there named Terry McCosker. There's a consulting company called RCS Australia. And Terry has this process. He is a student of people and how people change and how they develop. And he asks when a farm wants to begin consulting with them, they essentially do two things. One is they have an initial week-long 7-day course. And the next is they sign up to get together once a month with couples from 3 other farms as a small group with a coach. And they get to pick the coach. They have the team at RCS Australia is a team of about 40 coaches, and one of them is really good at economics, and one's good at veterinary, and one's good at breeding. And so they pick whoever they want to get together with once a month for a 4-year period. But that initial 7-day process, Terry gave me something really important to think about that I think we should all be aware of. In those 7 days, they saturate people's brains with all kinds of knowledge and information about agronomy management and grazing management and nutrition management and just on and on and on. Said people get done with that and their brains are just fried. He said that's very deliberate. He said the purpose of that 7-day course is not to teach them anything. He said the purpose is for them to get to the end of the 7-day course and say, I know nothing. And once they realize, once they realize the scope of all the information that they were not aware of, now they're open to learning.
100%.
Yeah.
They need to get to the point where they say, I know nothing. And my hope for the few hours that we have together tomorrow is that I can offer some hope and some inspiration for a different approach, a different idea, and perhaps in some small way get people to the realization that I had no idea that all of this existed. Because that's where I was, and that's where and I'm just constantly learning more. But that's where I was when I started this journey. I had no idea there was even such a thing as plant immune systems. When we are at that point, when we are willing to recognize and acknowledge that, you know what, there is a lot of stuff out there that I didn't know, that's the point we can start making progress.
Yeah, totally.
Yep.
Totally get it. Hey, John, it's been a complete honor having you here.
It's been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on.
I've learned, we've both learned so much, and although I am not ready to become an actual farmer myself, but I've just doubled my passion for this whole journey right now.
Yeah, no kidding.
So thank you again, and I'm sure our listeners will be very, very thankful as well. So on behalf of our listeners, thank you as well.
Yeah.
We have a lot to learn, and I think we just realized that we don't know anything.
Yeah. It's been very enlightening.
Very good.
Very
Well, thanks for
encouraging.
having me on, and I'm happy to have any further follow-up conversations in the future as it becomes useful.
Really appreciate that.
All right.
Thank you very much, and everybody, we will see you guys next time.